International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola says it's all systems go for the G20 Leaders Summit at the Nasrec Expo Centre at the weekend. South Africa is fully prepared to host a historic G20 Leaders Summit. 42 nations and organizations have confirmed that they will attend. Nearly all G20 countries will be represented at the head of state or at a head of government level. Only 4 countries sending lower level delegations: Russia, Mexico, Argentina. Mexico and Argentina will be represented by foreign ministers, Russia by also ministers and Sherpas. China represented by Premier Li Qiang. And that's not unusual. Over the last while, Xi Jinping has largely let his 2IC, Premier Li, to attend these multilateral bodies. But as South Africa welcomes leaders from across the globe to this country, the US seemingly continuing not only their boycott, but a plan to delegitimize South Africa as a host of this G20 summit. Remember, South Africa hands over the summit, the presidency, to the US for 2026. But here's US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talking in the White House yesterday.
The U.S. is back on the international stage as a leader. We have whittled down the G20 back to basics. We are making it work for the American people better than ever. We have the G20 had become basically the G100 this past year. So it will be a concentrated group in Miami, seeing the best America has to offer with American leadership, thanks to President Trump.
Professor Patrick Bond joins me now, Director for the Center for Social Change at the University of Johannesburg. Look, if you're not going to come, you're not going to come. But what is this? Continued delegitimization with the false notion of white persecution in South Africa? Or is this the US trying to centralize the global conversation between maybe itself, China? Good morning, Patrick.
Good morning, Lester. Good morning to the listeners. And it's such an interesting time for those interested in ideology, those of us who follow the paleo-conservative, the far-right isolationism, the xenophobia, the protectionism, the racism, and all of the Islamophobia, all of the things that Donald Trump has drawn, let's say, his MAGA base, his Make America Great base into, for example, saying Christians are being mass murdered in Nigeria because of their religion, or that there's a white Afrikaner farm genocide. Those myths that he's building up are now coming into fusion, a terrible fusion, with the classical U.S. imperialists. Those are what we would call neoliberals and neoconservatives. And that's where Bessent comes from as the Treasury Secretary, from Wall Street, and from a sense that maybe, as he says, back to basics. He doesn't want to deal with the problems the U.S. has caused, climate catastrophe, or the withdrawal of food aid and emergency assistance, humanitarian support that are making places like Sudan and Eastern DRC more difficult, with hundreds of thousands. In fact, one study showing 14 million dead, thanks to Elon Musk's wrecking of U.S. aid a few months ago. It may have changed because PEPFAR, the AIDS medicines, is back a little bit. It may not be 14 million, but there's enormous destruction from that paleo-conservative wing. And now you see Bessent saying, well, we'll get back to a situation where we can get the soft power back after having wrecked it. And that means maybe, as you say, centralizing the sense, his hope that Miami in December, it's a long time away next year, many things are going to happen. I worry something happening next 2 or 3 days as well, Lester, such as invasion of Venezuela, or Israel, warring on Iran. These are really imminent, and what Trump likes to do when he sees a big party somewhere else.
If a lot of the conversations, Patrick, is around reshaping global financial systems, if it's about restructuring debt programs for emerging economies. Plenty of these world's financial systems and services and institutions are based in the United States. What actually credible, tangible outcome could there be to the discussion about reshaping the global financial system if the United States say, well, we're not even going to be part of this, and in fact, whatever is going to come out of a leader's statement at the end of this summit, we're going to delegitimize and we're going to trash?
Yes, there won't be a leader's statement. There's going to be a chair statement because the U.S. has already said that they're going to work, and they have the Argentine allies, Mohammed bin Salman, they have Turkey's Erdogan, they have some allies. There are basically three countries aligned with the U.S. that we've seen the New York Times reporting the other day, sabotaging anything that might be progressive. However, I don't think they are going to oppose what comes out financially because there's nothing much coming out. There's really not going to be, thanks to Trevor Manuel, who has conflicts of interest being the head of Old Mutual, the biggest insurance company in Africa, and deputy head of Rothschild. There's no shakeup. There's no debt relief or odious debt recognition. There's no debt audits the way, say, Gen Z and Kenya have been demanding. Unfortunately, this is a kind of a Mickey Mouse multilateralism. Partly, as you say, the Yankees aren't there, and that means there's no, New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street banker types. Besant has been ignoring all the preliminary meetings, so nothing much can be expected in a substantive way. We're already seeing the climate catastrophe continuing in even the Amazon, where the big conference is being hosted, again with the U.S. Out of the picture, but the big boys not wanting to make any other changes. So I think delegitimization is deserved of our G20 hosting, not for the reason Donald Trump says, obviously, but for the reason that this is imperial plus some sub-imperial allies not doing anything to address world problems.
It's not just the G20 leaders meeting. There'll be also sideline meetings. There'll be the IPSA leaders summit, the India, Brazil, South Africa leaders summit. There'll be a EU-SA summit. Ursula von der Leyen, the EU president, will be there. There'll be various European leaders here in South Africa. It does not necessarily just weigh in on what comes out of the G20, but also what other meetings can take place. But does this delegitimize? Does this pop Cyril Ramaphosa's balloon? This was his in a country where he has failed to make a mark with a GNU over the last 16 months. This was supposed to be his coup de grace for 2025. Is his balloon deflated when we see countries like the US, Argentina saying, you know what, I'm following Donald Trump's lead, we're not going to attend?
Yeah, I would even add that Mexico, where there's a social crisis, a sort of, let me call it astroturf, not grassroots, but a protest that's really demobilized Claudia Sheinbaum briefly, and that was nearly taking over of her palace, and some injuries of police trying to defend it the other day. This was a right-wing, not a proper Gen Z protest. But then you also have China not sending Xi Jinping, but instead Li Qiang. And we don't even expect to see Sergei Lavrov from Russia. He usually takes Putin's place when there's an ICC arrest warrant. He stands in, he won't be there. So it's a disappointment at that level of just the very basics as who's in the House. But, the most important thing is, again and again, we've found Donald Trump's ability to divide and conquer and expect him to make some, naughty statement of some sort or other to distract everyone from what is happening at Nasrec, no matter that not much is going to be happening there.
And lots happening in his neck of the woods with the Senate and the House passing a bill yesterday to release the Epstein files. He's been looking for any type of distraction from what he faces at home. Professor Patrick Bond, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us.